everyone, and welcome to Look Down There, the show where we talk about all the things we don't talk about. I'm your host, Michelle Lamore. Today, my guest is an ex-mormon turned pleasure revolutionary. She is a somatic sex and intimacy coach and consent educator. She is the co-founder of the School of Consent with Dr. Betty Martin, the creator of the Wheel of Consent. She is a certified embodied sex coach, sexological body worker, and Wheel of Consent facilitator, among other things. And she is here with me today. Please welcome Robyn Dalzen. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to you. I worked with you in the past as I took your Wheel of Consent intro class online. I think it was earlier this year. Everything's blending together, so I'm not quite sure, but it was incredible. And I like your work. The Wheel of Consent has been transformative in my life, and I absolutely love nerding out about consent now. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
But the piece I did not know about you is your ex-mormon life. So tell me about that shift, because I grew up in an evangelical home. And I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday who, is also an evangelical. And so, we were talking about what was that moment where that shift happened for you, where you were like, oh, maybe this isn't for me.
That's a great question. And it's funny because I almost hesitated including that in my bio, and it just felt like an important piece to acknowledge the journey of where I've come from and where I am now and what that process has been for me. And we all have our journeys that we're on, wherever our starting point. And then where it is we want to come to be in a place. For me, it's finding that place of authenticity and finding our authentic expression in the world. And so that process for me has been, wow. I mean, I feel like it's an ongoing and ever evolving lifetime process. And it really was, coming into adulthood and starting to look at my life and look at my sexuality, my sense of self, how I wanted to express myself in the world, and finding I kept coming against these barriers to that authentic expression and having all kinds of messages about how I'm supposed to be in the world, how I'm supposed to show up, what I'm supposed to do, how I'm supposed to dress, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and finding myself coming up against, pushing against these walls over and over and over again, until there came a point where it was like, hang on, I've put these walls up around me, and my culture has put these walls around me. Do they still exist for me? And so it was like, I have this image in my mind of the Miley Cyrus song, the Wrecking Ball, and the video of that, where it's this giant wrecking ball knocking down these walls. And so it's been this gradual process for me of knocking down walls and starting to find and take up more space around myself and deciding what is the world that I live in, what's the space I want to occupy, and how do I show up more fully in that space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you feel supported in that shift as you went to do something, very unconventional?
I have, and I feel like I've had people who have gone before me who have shown me and kind of thrown the line out of, there's something else here. There's another possibility. There's another way of being. One of my greatest inspirations is my sister, who stepped out of our religious faith before I did, and was experimenting with different things. And so I was watching her, and there was a lot of permission that I felt to start expanding outward. There have been others in my life who have been living other realities, other options, who have shown me like, okay, there's something else here. And I've also been really conscious about, and part of my learning process has been, how many different communities can I step into? How many different experiences can I have to start to expand my palette and see what's possible? Mm. It's like starting with, you're given one meal and you eat that meal every day, to stepping into a room with a buffet and being able to pick and choose what it is I want to try and what tastes good and what am I in the mood for. And I think a lot of that applies to our connection to pleasure, our connection to sensuality. We're often given these scripts of what's okay, what's not okay, what's mainstream, the things that everybody else is doing, versus saying, look, here are all the possibilities, and we're all different beings. We all have different experiences. We all have different likes and dislikes. And what if it was all possible and we could just explore and experiment and see what resonates with each of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you are doing this work, I mean, you've been doing it a long time. You've transformed your life. You've transformed other people's lives with this work. But do you ever experience kind of this old conditioning creeping in? Do you ever feel those walls trying to rebuild? And if you do, how do you navigate that?
I'm sure. Yes, I know there are it's like peeling the onion. There are layers, and I imagine it will be a lifetime process. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the work that I do, and particularly the wheel of consent work, I'm wheel of consent work, sexuality work, trauma work. It's peeling away layers and layers of conditioning, and coming back to what I would say is our more authentic core. And there's always going to be things that we're taught, things that we learn. I don't know what the purest essence of our beings really is. Being human, I think that's part of the human experience. We're born, we're taught all these things. I feel like the first half of my life was, here are all the shoulds. And then the second half has been questioning all the shoulds and unlearning. Mm-hmm. And so a big part of this work for me is supporting people in that unlearning process. And then finding, what is it that I really resonate with? What is it that I feel drawn to? What is it that brings me a sense of joy and excitement? And so in my own life, when I find myself, anytime I hear or like say to myself, you should, or you shouldn't, like that for me is a big red flag. It's like, okay, pause. Where is this coming from? Where is this idea that I should be doing this, or it should look a certain way? And then I have to pause and question, like, okay, is that true? And what if it wasn't? Then what? Then what becomes possible? And so part of that is also working with people to expose those places where those shoulds live. And some of it is self-imposed. Some of it is imposed by our culture, our communities, our families, our religion, all of these different places. And so it's slowing down and coming into a place of being able to have more space to examine that.
Yeah, you definitely touched on something that's a big theme in my house these days, the should word. Um, and how like it's so heavy, that word should. It's kind of like filled with pressure. There's some guilt, the feeling of not being good enough or that you're not enough in general, and just really paying attention to it, like how easily it just comes out of our mouths and we don't even think about it, right? And we don't think about the impact of saying to someone else, even, hey, you should do this thing, and just like putting all of that on top of them. And so I'm really been paying attention to that and examining, like, ooh, I feel like I've said the word should like almost as much as the word no in my life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great practice to just start noticing, where am I using that word? Where am I using that in the ways that I'm speaking to other people? Where am I using it in speaking to myself? And even that pause and, noticing, there it is again.
Mhm.
That process of just starting to notice will bring a lot of new awareness.
Yeah, yeah. And I've also been working on the have tos and moving towards the choosing to. And so that's been hard, like just reframing that. But I liked what you said about moving from your shoulds to your wants, right? Like, how do you make that shift to really find what it is that you want in the moment and allow yourself to want that in the moment, whatever that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of the key pieces in this work, of living a more intentional life, living a more pleasure filled life, living a more joyful life. And it's one of the pieces of, I use the wheel of consent. It's really more of an agreement making process. And as I start to deconstruct the pieces of that, noticing what we want and allowing ourselves to want what we want is a key part of being able to ask for what we want. And so it's like, oh yeah, obvious. Of course, duh. Like, I have to know what I want if I'm going to ask for it. And yet there's this expectation that we should we should communicate our needs clearly. We should ask for what we want. We should say no to what we don't want. So already there's this pressure of getting to the agreement piece, but there's not a lot of emphasis placed on actually noticing the things that we want, noticing the things we don't want. And I would break that into, so the wanting piece. What is it that feels good to me? What is it that would be nurturing for me? What would be supportive? I mean, there are lots of different things that we can want. And it's important to connect to our wants, our desires. And then it's important to also notice our level of willingness, what we're willing to engage in with another, what we're willing to give to another, whether that's our time, our attention, our resources, access to our bodies, our service. And so those two parts are an important part of the equation. And it requires us slowing down and taking the time to notice. It all comes back to the noticing. Mm-hmm. So noticing in any given moment, what am I needing right now? What am I wanting right now? What would feel good to me? How am I feeling right now? So that's even a step before that. Like, what's happening in my body? Am I feeling tired? Do I need rest? Am I feeling energized? Am I feeling lonely? Do I want companionship? Am I feeling stressed? Do I need to say no to some things? So that first piece is becoming aware of our system, of our nervous system, of our body, and what's happening in any given moment. And that's certainly not something I was taught. I don't know that many people were taught to pay attention to the sensations that are happening in our body, to the emotions that are happening in our body. And so that is or the entry point into then noticing, okay, this is how I'm feeling right now. And as a result of that, this is something I'm wanting. And then being able to move to the place of being able to communicate that. And oftentimes people, it's either, well, I don't have time for that, or that feels totally foreign. I don't even know how to approach that. I don't feel anything in my body. I don't even know what I want. And then there's the vulnerability of it. Can I actually name it? Can I actually talk about these things? And is it safe enough? And what if I go through this whole thing and I talk about it and then I don't get it? How do I deal with the disappointment? How do I deal with the feelings that come up around that? So it, in theory, it seems simple. Yeah, notice what you want, ask for it. Notice what you don't want, say no. And as soon as we bring it into the body, move it away from a cognitive, mind-based, intellectual-based practice to an actual embodied experience, it requires some time and attention, and I would even say support, to be able to create that space for discovery, for being with the feelings that arise in that process, for knowing what to do with the feelings that arise, and to know that you're not alone in this. And so coming back to the question that you asked, like, how did I get on this path? It was having other people around me who were also interested and committed to living in this way, to living more embodied. And so for me, this work is it's not singular work. It's not just helping one person access that, but it's actually creating a culture where that's welcome, where that's supported, where that's accepted. In fact, where that's the norm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much in there. But one of the things that came to mind as you were talking is this, like, freedom, right? Like, suddenly you're giving yourself this permission and this freedom. And I find it interesting, ironic that we live in a culture that's all about freedom, right? Like, we have to protect our freedom. But then I wonder, are we really free? And what does freedom mean? And when you start doing this work and you start noticing what it is that you want, valuing it, trusting it, communicating it, how scary that freedom can feel.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think it's like we're in a culture, right? The freedom culture, but we don't give ourselves that freedom. We don't give others that kind of freedom. So why do you think that we fear freedom, but also value it so much?
Mm-hmm. How much time do we have?
Yeah.
This is really, it's such a juicy, important inquiry. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And, particularly, I feel like there are several things colliding in American culture and in our way of being. And there are some really controversial topics where I've really seen this come to the surface. And for me, it is about, there's a lot of talk about empowerment in personal development work, in sexuality work. And for me, empowerment is about coming into choice. Mm-hmm. And it's coming into choice in our bodies, in our lives, And for me, it's different from freedom. And with choice comes great responsibility. So one of the pieces that I talk about in the trainings that I do is distinguishing between, talking about our personal domain. And our domain is what we have a right to and a responsibility for. And so, some of the things that are in our domain include our thoughts, our beliefs, our desires, our body. And so these are things that we have a right to, but we're responsible for. Mm. And so I think about impact and the impact of our choices. And so it's having choice, it's having personal responsibility for that choice. And it's also recognizing and acknowledging impact on others. And so I think about this level of sort of personal power, maybe even personal freedom, personal choice. And we also exist within a culture, within society, within a system. And there are ways that our personal choices impact our community. And we're responsible for that, in my opinion. And so where I feel some of this gets lost in our culture is this idea that I have a right to do what I want, when I want, how I want. That's my freedom. But what it doesn't acknowledge is the impact on our communities. Mm. And so for me, it's having that awareness, and it's finding the ways of living our fullness with an awareness of how that impacts others around us. And how do we actually create a culture that supports autonomy for all beings, that supports safety for all beings, that supports choice for all beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about empowerment is coming into choice, but also realizing and considering and being mindful of the fact that your choices have impact. It is not just, I do whatever I want, whenever I want. This is not what we're talking about.
No,
not at all. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a little bit about the wheel of consent and what it is? I know we've mentioned it, but I want to break it down for those that aren't aware yet.
Yeah. So the wheel of consent is a model. I would say a model of relating that was developed by Dr. Betty Martin. And within the wheel of consent, there are two dynamics that become clear. And it relates to the dynamics of receiving and giving. And the agreement that is made in order for one person to receive what they want and the other person to give what's been requested or wanted or needed. And so when most of us think of receiving and giving, we think of it as, if I'm giving, I'm doing something for you, for your benefit. So I'm going into action. I'm doing something that you want. And when we're in the role of receiving, it's often experienced as someone else is doing something for me for my benefit. So you could almost think of it like an active and passive role. So, an example would be, I'm receiving a massage. And so someone is giving me a massage, they're doing the action, and it's for my benefit. And I get to lay on the table and I'm done too, and it feels amazing. And I receive that gift of action. And so Betty Martin was a hands-on coach, practitioner, sex worker. And in her work with people around touch, intimacy, connection, what she found was she started asking people two different questions. How do you want me to touch you? Which is that example I just gave of, I'm going to do something for your benefit. And then the second question was, how do you want to touch me? And with that question, people were like, I don't even know what you're asking. Like, why would I want to do something to you? And she started to see, wow, these are two very different experiences. And so this second dynamic of receiving and giving, which is often more familiar in, maybe a relationship with a lover or a partner, where sometimes we want to just reach out and we want to put our arms around our partner. We want to cuddle them. We want to play with their body, where we want to take the action and there's something we want to do. And so in this dynamic, the receiving role is taking the action. So I'm noticing what it is I want and I'm moving towards it. I'm taking the action for it. And the person who's giving is giving the gift of access. So in that place of giving, I'm allowing the other to do what they want. And that might be access to my body. Go ahead and feel me up. Have fun. Or it might be giving access to my time or attention. That might be, yes, I'm happy to listen to you talk. If you want to process your day or something that's challenging for you, I can give you 10 minutes of my time to listen. And so it's something that many of us are familiar with, but we don't often have language to understand what's actually happening. And it's not a dynamic that many of us are familiar with. And so oftentimes we're taught to put the needs of others first, to give of our action. Coming from a religious background, there was this belief that giving is more spiritual, is more righteous than receiving. And so we're taught that doing for ourselves is wrong, is shameful, is, whatever other reasons. And so if we want to reach out and put our hands on someone, or we want to do something for our own benefit, what we learn is that if I want to do something, I have to be giving. I have to do for someone else. And so we can start to hide our desires behind doing for someone else. And I see you nodding, and it's like, yeah, this was so familiar to me. It's like, oh yeah. And so one of the beauties of this model is that it starts to bring to light these places where we haven't had access to these two ways of receiving. We haven't had the experience of it, or we have had the experience of it. There's a familiarity in the body, but we've never had the language to know how to say, hey, can I put my hands on you? Can I feel you up? Can I take up your time? Can I come over and sleep on your couch tonight? I had a fight with my partner. So centering our desires and our ability to move towards it's the least familiar place for many people in these different aspects of the wheel. So there, in this model of the wheel, you have this circle, which symbolizes consent or the agreement that we have. And then there are 4 different quadrants, or 4 different possibilities. So 2 of those are receiving. Either I do what I want with your consent or permission, and we call that the taking quadrant. And that would be asking this question of, may I do something for my own benefit? May I put my arms around you? May I rest my head in your lap? May I feel the texture of your skin? May I come over and spend some time with you? May I tell you about my day? So that's one way of receiving. The second way of receiving, we call this the accepting quadrant. And that's where I ask the question, will you do something to benefit me? Will you come over and cook me dinner? Will you give me a massage? Will you tell me something that you appreciate about me? And so I'm asking the other to do something for my benefit. So there are those two options on the receiving half. And then on the giving side, the one that we're most familiar with is I'll do something for your benefit. I take the action and it's for you. And we call that the serving quadrant. And so I go into service for your benefit. Mm-hmm. And then the second way of giving is this gift of access, where we call that the allowing quadrant. And I allow you to do what you want, and I take care of my limits. So in both the cases of giving, I'm putting aside what I want, and I'm staying responsible for my limits. I'm speaking up and saying, no, I'm not available for that, but maybe this. Or I'm speaking up when I've hit my point of enoughness in my giving. That's as much as I can give right now. On the receiving half, where we're putting our desires forward, we're doing all that, noticing what we want, asking for it, while at the same time respecting the limits that have been set by the giver. Mm-hmm. And so that's a brief explanation of this model. And what I have found is that there's so much richness in every one of these quadrants. There are places that feel challenging. There are places that feel delightful. There are places that feel less familiar. And so it starts to provide a way of understanding ourselves. Most people have the hardest time learning to receive, to put their desires forward. It's easier to give than to receive because of all the things that we've been taught. Mm. And there's so much joy and possibility that opens up when people see, actually, it's a good thing to ask for what I want. It's a good thing to notice and to speak up for that. And so there's a lot to be found in it. And what I realized in learning it, in teaching it, in living it, is that it's not a new concept. These dynamics are playing out around us all the time. And what it does is bring clarity, it brings language, it brings communication tools to start to be more explicit, more mindful, more clear in our communication.
Yeah. It's such a juicy little wheel, isn't it? We could have 12-part series all about it. But one of the things for me, it helped really kind of define some relationship dynamics. And also I think it's really helpful to kind of head resentment off at the pass, or see why resentment might be building. And, one of the things, I think it was the last week of class, you talked about the wheel being the consent, but we operate outside of the wheel so often, right? That we do all of these things without actual consent, right? And that becomes the shadow parts of the wheel. And so when we did that, I was like, oh, wow. I am really over serving, and this person is really over accepting. And this is why I feel really taken advantage of. And it's really interesting once you start to take it apart and really think about all the layers within this, how it is that you're interacting and like what relationships are really serving you and what are dragging you down,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And when I say these dynamics are playing out all around us all the time, many of those dynamics are the shadows of these two dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I describe the shadow expressions or behaviors on the receiving half is when there's something that we want, but we don't ask for it. And so when that comes to our action, taking action for what we want, but we haven't asked and don't have an agreement, that's where we get into stealing. It's where many consent violations play out. Abusive relationships, perpetrator, exploitation, entitlement, and it happens at the interpersonal level, and it happens at the systemic level. Land being taken, resources being taken, where we feel entitled to it. And then there's, where we fall into the shadow of there's something we want someone else to do for us, but we don't ask for it. And we come into a place of expectation. They should know what I want and need, and they should just jump into action for my benefit.
Yeah, just had a whole thing about that a few days ago with my partner. I was like, you should just know.
Yeah, if you loved me, you would know. Yes. So we can go to this place of entitlement. Like, if you love me, you should know how to take care of me. You should know what I want every moment. You should know when I'm hungry or tired. So it's where we get into this place of, not clearly communicating, and not asking, and then getting resentful. On the giving half, when we go into action for someone else's benefit, but they haven't asked for it, we also find ourselves in the shadow. And this can lead to a sense of burnout, martyrdom. This is the place of the pleaser, the do-gooder. This is what I'm quite familiar with. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's like, oh, if I just do all the right things, I'll get the love that I want. That's an old response of, I'm just going to go into action and do all the things that I think the other person wants. And then oftentimes there's something we're wanting from that we can't locate or ask for. Mm-hmm. That might be, I want connection. I want closeness, but it's hard for me to say, can we have time together? And so I'll get really busy and start doing things for you. And then you think you're doing it, you think I'm doing it for myself, and I think I'm doing it for you. And then nobody's really receiving. Mm-hmm. This happens a lot in bed. It's like, I'm going to do all the right things to make you feel good and give you pleasure. And you think I'm doing all the things that I want. And so I think I'm giving and you think I'm giving, and nobody's on the receiving side. Mm. And then when something happens to us, someone else is doing what they want, and it involves us, our body, our time, and we haven't said yes, then that puts us into the place of being being perpetrated, in the place of the victim, where we're out of choice. We don't have a choice about what happens to us. And we go into this place of going along. And it can be very subtle. And so part of this process of learning to identify what we want and speak up for it, and this process of learning to notice what our limits are and speak up for our no, is actually bringing us inside this circle of consent. And that's how we start to clean up some of these shadows. And for many of these shadows, these were adaptive survival strategies. Like, we're very clever humans, and we all have needs. And if we don't have the tools to ask, we find a workaround. We find ways of getting around these things. And so this is an important part of learning. For me, learning this model has been a way of noticing the places in my life where I'm not totally in alignment, where I haven't had the tools in the past, I haven't had the skill of noticing or knowing how to ask for things. I haven't had the sense of worthiness, even of like, wow, am I even worthy of having needs? And can I speak up for those? And so this is part of the process of that. It's both the unlearning of these old patterns and learning new ways of being, learning new ways of relating and showing up with each other.
Yeah, and I think all of that sounds really hopeful, but I think it can sound or feel really daunting for people to kind of dive in and dance with these shadows, right? It's hard work. And you talked earlier about the support, and oftentimes that's the big thing that's lacking. I find that there's a lot of people that have the desire to change and to even do the work. But the biggest issue is that can't be done in isolation, right? Like the support needs to be there. And oftentimes that can mean that their lives end up looking very different, or the people in their lives that are there now don't remain there. And so that can be very scary and a big roadblock for people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think this is one of the pieces, like there's talk of transformational work, and transformational work is hard. It's disruptive. And so as people step into learning how to show up differently, learning how to communicate their needs, they're actually transforming themselves and they're transforming their relationships, which can result in more depth, more joy, more intimacy with others. And it can also mean relationships falling away. There may be people who are used to relating in a particular way. And I've certainly seen this in my life. As I've shown up differently, it's disruptive to the relationship. And it's required an ability to really stick with what's important to me. How do I want to be living? How do I want to be showing up? And allowing those relationships to unravel or to naturally fall away, while cultivating the relationships where people do want to show up with me in a different way. And so it's both. And so being ready for that is a big part of it.
Yeah, having the courage to do that work, and then also your compassion and grace for yourself as you do it, because it's clunky. It can be very clunky and awkward, and like putting ourselves in situations where we're not comfortable or we're not fluent yet, like can feel, really vulnerable, really scary. So again, like the support is so needed.
Yeah, when I started learning this, I was very rigid about it. It's like, okay, everything has to fit into this. And I need clarity in every relationship, and who's this for? Like, one of the big questions that arises in this work is, who is it for? And who's doing and who's it for? And that can be really useful in bringing more simplicity. And what's required is a lot of self-compassion, in the process of learning.
Mm.
And so I've certainly noticed that with myself and with the people that I've worked with. It's like, try it on. It's a practice. Experiment with it. Notice the places where you can practice. Notice the places where you can't, and that's okay. You know, don't try to apply it to everything in your life. Create containers and practice bubbles where it's like, okay, we're stepping into this intentionally for this time, and then we're going to live our lives. And so that's how I suggest people step into and start experimenting with it. And then I would also say, learning to use these 2 questions and noticing when there's something that you want. If there's something I want another to do for me, I ask, will you? And if there's something I want to do for myself, I ask, may I? And just starting there, starting to practice and notice with those 2 questions is, so there's something I want, it's for me. And do I want to do this for myself, or do I want someone else to do it for me? And then letting the other person be themselves and respond a yes or a no or a maybe, or they don't know. And starting with that awareness around what is it that I want, and can I ask for it?
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were rigid about the learning at the beginning. And I find for myself that I have been very rigid about learning just in general, I think, in my life. And I think maybe that's for most people how they learn, because it's a learning, it's like fear-based learning. It's like learning, do it right or else, or like it's very like black or white, right or wrong. There's no room. Like, it's very patriarchal, like our conditional, like our patriarchal learning. And so that is something that I'm aware of right now and experiencing in my new learning environments, that like, oh, wow, this is a very different approach to learning. And it's so different. And I have to unlearn all of that conditioning and like learn how to learn in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yet another layer.
Right. I know. So many things. Robyn, thank you so much for joining me today. I loved our conversation. Obviously you could keep going, but we'll leave it here. And we'll make sure that people come and find you and take your classes. So where can they find you?
There are a couple places where you can find more information. So my personal website is robyndalzen.com, ROBYNDALZEN.com. And then the second is schoolofconsent.org. And I imagine we can include these in the notes. And so both of those places you can find upcoming workshops. I work with people one-on-one. I work with couples, doing private coaching for both couples and individuals. And then I offer group workshops as well. And then on the School of Consent website, there are lots of free materials, free videos on the Wheel of Consent if you want to get a taste that way. And then there's also the book, The Art of Receiving and Giving, which is really the Bible, coming back to the religious reference that we started with. My new Bible, The Art of Receiving and Giving, which is Betty Martin's book, that goes through the theory of the wheel, offers practices with the wheel. So that's a great place to start as well, and take at your own pace. And yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Is there any place on Instagram that you would like people to follow you or the school?
Yeah. So there's also Robyn Dalzen on Instagram and Wheel of Consent on Instagram.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And everybody out there, please go and follow Robyn, follow the Wheel of Consent, take a look at the website, get the book. You're going to love it. It's great. Take your time with it though. You don't have to rush. Like you can go at your own pace and learn how to learn again.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All the unlearning and learning.
Yeah.
And
So much.
thank you. Thank you for this chat. It's been totally delightful to be with you.
Yes, thank you. All right, everyone, go ahead and spread your legs and spread the love, like and share and follow and subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your lovers, and everyone in between. You can follow us here at I Look Down There or me at Michelle L'Amour. And remember that confidence comes from the bottom up. So grab a mirror and look down there. Till next time.